listening to the We Are Innovation podcast. Join us as we explore how innovation, new technologies, and human creativity improve our lives. The future is calling.
Hi, I'm Federico Fernández. Welcome to a new episode of the We Are Innovation podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a recent report on the volume of regulation within the European Union. And for that, I am accompanied by the author of that report and fellow podcaster, Jonas Herby. Jonas is a special consultant at CEPOS, a Danish think tank. He is an expert in regulation with a focus on the consequences of the extensive regulation on the lives of Danish people. Jonas is also an expert in socio-economic analysis and has helped develop the Ministry of Transport's official model and unit prices. He is also the host of not one, but two podcasts. Regelstatten, in which he talks to experts, opinion leaders, about how regulations affect the life of the daily lives of Danish people and Danish society. And on economic principles, he introduces his listeners to key economic topics and concepts and gets a broad introduction, and then they get a broad introduction to basic economic thinking. You can find Jonas's bio and his social media on the profile at CEPOS. I'm going to leave a link to that, and I'm also going to leave a link to Jonas's report on the description of the episode. Jonas, welcome to the We Are Innovation podcast.
Thank you very much, Federico.
It's great having you. And Jonas, let's start with this topic. This is, as I was telling you before we started recording, regulation, and basically from the same, let's say, point of view that you research it, is something that we are very much concerned. And in Europe, unfortunately, in the European Union in particular, there's a lot to talk about. And well, you just recently published a research on regulation in the EU. And one of the findings of your research is that since the Maastricht Treaty was signed, there has been a 729% increase in regulation in the EU. And I would like to know this a broad question, but I would like if you could walk me and our listeners through this process, and what do you believe are the primary drivers behind this very big growth?
Ooh, that's a lot of questions. But so let me start to just address your first point that many people don't, in my view, don't pay enough attention to regulation as a problem for the society. We tend to discuss taxes a lot, at least in Denmark, while regulation is as a topic is not discussed that much, and I think that's probably not the best prioritization of our democratic speak. I think we should put more weight on regulation, because there's so much research that show that regulation is a problem for society, and maybe we can come back to why that is later. But because I have this view, a lot of my work is directed at quantifying the amount of regulation. So I've done this in Denmark, and lately I also turned to the EU, which is, of course, an important part of the Danish regulation. So in the report you talk about, basically what we did was we took for each year since 1973, since the beginning of the EU, we counted the amount of current regulation for each year. So each year we said, okay, how much new regulation came, and then we counted the number of words. Of course, we didn't do this by hand, but we had a computer program that could do this for us. And based on that, we could kind of draw a figure saying that how much regulation was in the beginning of the EU. And clearly, of course, it grows because you need to have treaties and stuff like that when you implement the EU. But then we follow it over time. And today we can see that there's more than 20 million words regulating EU citizens and businesses.
And another interesting finding that you told us in the report is that in spite of their words, that the von der Leyen Commission claims that they are doing things to simplify laws within the EU. The volume of regulation has increased 14% since 2020.
Yes.
Let's try to what are the factors, why this contradiction, why they say one thing but it seems that they are doing something. What do you think are the factors at play here?
I think that's they say what they think the voters want to hear, and then they do what they want to do, basically. But I think it's probably a little bit more complicated, because if you ask people, a lot of people and politicians will say that there's too much regulation, but the same persons has a lot of new regulation that would like to implement. And I think in the daily life, the latter wins, that it's easier to implement new regulation than it is to remove existing regulation. So what we see in the EU, and we have seen the same in Denmark, is that, and in the United States and more or less all democracies around the world, that the amount of regulation just keeps increasing. There are examples where governments has success in reducing the amount of regulation, but in most places, the amount of regulation just keep increasing. And I think it all boils down to what you can refer to bias, I think. Maybe not all, but I think that's a large part of it, that you see a problem and then politicians think that, okay, I'm here to solve people's problems, and then you see, what can I do here? I could either spend more money on it, or I can regulate it. And I think that often it's easier to regulate it because then you don't have to prioritize. If you spend money, then you have to take money from another part of the economy, and people don't like that. But if you regulate it, you don't have to remove existing regulation. So I think that it's easier to regulate. Just add new regulation, and then you can tell the voters that you solve the problem. The problem, and that would be a good thing if they actually solve the problem. But the case here is that often the regulation doesn't solve the problem. They just either they don't solve the problem, just create a bureaucracy, or they solve the problem but create new problems. So that's the basic problem with this growth in regulations.
In the context of the European Union, and I know the European Union, let's say it's 27 countries, if I remember correctly. So, but you think, your view, and I know, again, this is probably very subjective, but your view is that this push for more regulation comes stronger from civil society, or from, for lack of a better word, bureaucrats, both in supranational and national levels?
I think it's fair to say that it comes from all kind of different sources. So it comes from special interests. So maybe businesses want regulation that will limit competition. Households want regulation that protect them from dangerous products. Politicians want regulation that, and but I think basically what you say is that politicians just respond to the requirement from the society. So they respond to incentives. So if they want to be elected, they need to respond to these requests from households and businesses and so on. The problem with and you can say that sounds like a good thing, but the problem is that these regulations very often become special interests. So, for instance, I remember I read a story about an EU politician. I'm not sure where she was from, if it was the Parliament or whatever, but that's not important for the story. but they had been in the Facebook headquarter, and they told them about all the regulation they were going to impose on Facebook. And then Facebook, the people from Facebook seemed to be quite happy with that. And she was it got her a little worried. And I think she has very good reasons to be worried about that, because regulation almost always benefit the incumbent companies, because today it's more or less impossible to start a new social media platform based on a dorm room as Facebook was, because there's so much regulation. So the first thing you need to do is to hire 100 lawyers to help you what's called to help you understand all the rules before you can start even building the platform. And that means that regulation actually protects Facebook and Twitter and so on from new competition. So it benefits Facebook, and that's and you can say the same with even consumer protection. You can say that you have the same case because the middle class, they want protection from bad quality products, you can say. So if they buy something, they want to make sure that it's safe to use and it don't have chemicals or can hurt you in any way. They don't want to buy low quality products, basically. But if you're not from the middle class, but from the poor, one of the poorer classes, then sometimes it makes sense to buy a low quality product, because maybe you only want to use this item once, or if you buy, for instance, something for your kids, if they only use it once, or they only use it on top of for example, if it's to Halloween, and you know they're going to wear a jacket inside, so it doesn't matter if it contains a little chemicals because it's out on the outside of the jackets. Then it makes sense sometimes to buy low quality to save money, because if you have a low income, and then you have a lot of priorities you need to do. So here regulation can work as to protect the middle class. They don't have to think about if they're going to buy low quality products. They just go out on the market, but you cut off the low quality products for the low income groups. So, and you always have to consider this when someone propose new regulation, because someone will do it of a good heart, say that we think this is the right thing to do. So when you banned alcohol in the United States in the 30s, the ban was if you were from what is called like a religious person, you say that it's wrong to drink, so I do this to help people. And the criminals, the gangs, they said that okay, we also want this regulation because it benefit us, because we are very good at selling alcohol when it's illegal. But in both, so there are always these two arguments for regulation, and you first of all, you need to consider what is the real argument in this debate, and does that even hold? Is alcohol bad for people in general? So a ban would make the world better, or is it more complicated than that? And I think clearly the ban on alcohol in the 30s showed that that is more complicated than that.
Lots of things to unpack from what you just said, Jonas. Two things that came to my mind. Do you think that in Europe in particular, we should be afraid of, with regulation growing so, let's say, almost exponentially, should we be very much afraid of scenarios of regulatory capture in many, let's say, sectors of the economy?
Yes, I think we absolutely should, and I'm pretty sure that's already going on. But I would say, just to not to be too harsh on businesses, I would say there are two different kind of regulatory capture here. The first kind is when businesses propose new regulation to exclude potential competition from the market. And the second type is when politicians want to regulate something, and then businesses do this to protect their own business. So, for instance, if you're Facebook, then maybe you prefer a world without regulation, or with very limited regulation. But when the politicians start to regulate in order to solve some problem they think they can solve with regulation, then I think it's a natural reaction that you as a company start to say, okay, how can we do this so it doesn't hurt us too much? And then you get this regulatory capture. So I may seem a little harsh on businesses, but it takes two to tango, I think you can say here.
The second thing is the following. I would like to know your thoughts, to reflect of the nature of regulation itself, in the sense that regulation always, this is my view, regulation always comes later. If if regulators could see the future, they wouldn't be regulators, they would be entrepreneurs. They would be building the future, they would be creating it. So you have this problem also always that, regulation is almost by nature, looking backwards, never looking, and it can create like a very artificial and very dangerous stop in how a business model, a technology can develop. And particularly in an era like ours, in which technology is, developing so fast, and that's something that is great, regulation can become, very outdated almost. My feeling is in many occasions, when a regulation is published, it's already, dated. How do you see these dynamics?
So I think there are more things to think about here. I think one reason that regulation is often outdated is that people tend to solve the problems by themselves. So if there's a product that turns out to be dangerous to use, then people tend to react to that and stop using that, and then regulation comes afterwards and doesn't really solve the problem for people because they were able to solve it by themselves. There was the case in Denmark where there was a rising problem with a theft of license plates on cars. And then the Danish government, the Danish parliament, imposed a law that required all people to screw their license plate to the car, so it wasn't as easy to remove. But basically, it just takes another 5 to 10 seconds to take it off. But anyway, the problem was that if you follow the number of theft of license plates, then you can see that it increases, and then it starts falling, and then comes the regulation. So in some way, people were able to solve this by themselves. They didn't really need the regulation. So I think that's one reason why regulation is, but you still get all the bad things from this regulation, because now people can get a fine. People who lawful people who just do the ordinary day and work and take care of their kids, they can now get a fine if they drive around with a license plate without screws in. So you make people criminal to protect them, but you didn't really achieve anything by doing that. So that's one reason why I think regulation is sometimes backward looking. And then I think that one of the problem with this, I'm not sure. I totally agree that it always look backwards, because if you look at the regulation of artificial intelligence, then I think they're more. Maybe they're. I probably should call it fear regulation or something like that, because it seems like they imagine what could go wrong, and then they try to regulate that beforehand. And I think that's a very dangerous path to take, because, and I'll come back to that, but just think about what would have happened if we had applied the same thoughts on regulation of cars. Then it would have been almost, maybe we wouldn't have even invented the car, because it would be so difficult to make a car, because so many things could go wrong. You thought that people couldn't drive that fast, and there's a lot of things that could go wrong with cars. But what we did with cars was that we got this this vehicle, and then we saw that it has a lot of benefits, but also some bad things. So, and then we started to say, okay, can we somehow make safety belts? Can we improve the quality airbags and so on? Can we do something to invent new things that can handle these problems that's arising? But I think with the artificial intelligence, I worry that we get it kind of backwards. And the problem with that is that a lot of what the product will contains in the end is formed by the society. So if you have artificial intelligence developed in Denmark, it will be very different from artificial intelligence developed in China or Russia or Australia or Spain or whatever, because it's a part of, it's the culture impacts the product. And what I fear is that we get artificial intelligence, because we'll have that sooner or later, but we'll have it primarily driven by the US and China and places outside of EU. And that will mean that it is their culture that is within the artificial intelligence machine. So just one example. I have often wondered why the president in the United States, he can't say, I'm not sure I can say it on the podcast, but he can't say anything that is related to the female body in a speech, because that would be very bad for him, at least before Trump. But he can say that we'll hunt this terrorist down and kill him. But I think in Denmark it would be quite opposite. The Danish prime minister could say something about the female body, or say something a little sexual, but it's more difficult for her to say that we'll kill somebody, because it's just the Danish culture is different from the American culture. But that will be part of the artificial intelligence. So maybe in the future we can get we'll get access to more violence and less sexual content if you have an American invented artificial intelligence compared to a Danish invented artificial intelligence, just because of the difference in the culture. And I think competition is better at achieving at the product that fits the citizens better than regulation, basically, because the culture will, and people's decision will lead to products being more tailored to the culture than you can do with regulation.
I want to ask you also a few questions regarding Denmark, but before that, I want to go back to the report, because I think there's a lot, and please, I invite everybody to read the report. It's published at the Epicenter website. I'll leave the link on the description of the episode. But one of the things you highlighted that I would like if you could say a few words about it, is that you detect a shift within the European Union from so-called directives to more strict regulations.
Yes.
What do you think are the reasons for this shift? And what this shift means?
Yeah, so just to get people who's listening on board here, so regulations in the EU applies to all member states and are the same for all member states. So that's a regulation that applies directly for businesses and people in the member states, whereas directives they have to be implemented locally in the member states. So, for instance, if there's a regulation saying that this product is forbidden, then it applies immediately in all member states. But if there's a directive saying that member states should regulate this product, then each member state can regulate this product differently, and that means that they are more able to tailor the regulation to local what's called circumstances and culture and so on. And that means that in principle, directives are more suited for the subsidiarity principle. We come back to that a little. Maybe we should take it now. because the subsidiarity principle basically means that decisions should be made as closely as possible to the citizens, and that higher authorities should only intervene when absolutely necessary. And there's a lot of good reasons to work under the principle of subsidiarity. First of all, it allows the regulation to be more tailored and effective, and reflect these local circumstances and local culture and so on. And I also think from a democratic point of view, it's better because it's easier to hold people accountable. So for me, it's easier to get a contact with a Danish parliament, member of the parliament, and maybe get her to talk with her colleagues and maybe change the regulation. It's not easy, but it's easier than going via the EU and try to see if you can convince all of Europe to change the regulation. So there's a lot of very good reasons to have the subsidiarity principle. And in theory, directives they don't in all circumstances live up to the principle of the subsidiarity, but it's easier because you can tailor the regulation. But what we have seen is that since the middle of the zeros, so around 2005, regulation in EU has shifted from directives to regulations. So it means that it's more centralized. And what you often hear is that it's easier for businesses if the regulation is the same across all of Europe. And that's, of course, is true. But it really, really depends on what is in that regulation. And you probably heard about the cucumber curvature regulation. EU made some regulation that regulated the curvature of cucumbers in all member states. So from that, in that period, it has been repealed now. I think it was in 2009. But in that period, in theory, all cucumbers in the EU should have the same curvature. And I heard a member of the parliament from Norway explaining that she said that before the EU made all the curvature equal across all member states, all member states had their own regulations. So in some places it should be not that curved, and in other places it should be very curved. And she thought it was a good idea that EU, because of the internal market, she said it was a good idea that EU had this made this regulation saying that the curvature should now be like this. But that, for me, that is not in respect with the principle of subsidiarity, and it's bad regulation. Because what EU should have done was to say that if you have a green, long vegetable, also known as cucumber, then you, as a company, you will be able to sell that in all member states, despite of local regulations. So meaning that if you had a Danish cucumber, which tends to be fairly straight, I think, you should be able to sell that in Greece, where the cucumbers tend to be more curved because of the way they are grown. And that would be great regulation, because then you should make sure that cucumbers don't have to speculate about regulation in other countries, because they're sure you can sell the product as long as it's a safe cucumber. And Greece companies can't make the Greece government impose rules to keep out other European businesses and for competition. But EU took the different road and said that now we just make all. So instead of having 27 bad regulations, we now just have one bad regulation. But that's not the way to solve this problem. You should say that, okay, all companies can sell cucumbers across all of Europe, and that's basically it. So it depends on what's in those regulations. But I think from a lot of examples, I think this is not something that our report touches that much on, and we don't have any quantification of this. But I think that it's fair to say that a lot of these regulations behave I written more like the cucumber regulation as the EU made it, and not the cucumber regulation as I think it should have been. And that's why this move from directives to regulation and it basically just the increase in the number of regulations is a problem in my point of view.
I remember when Brexit, the Brexit debate was going on, and please, by the way, me personally, I was never a defender of Brexit, but it doesn't matter. But I remember one of the arguments of the, let's say, more free market, classical liberal wing of the Brexiteers was we were always for mutual recognition, not to have one regulation that dictates all over, the members of just, hey, whatever you're doing in Romania, whatever you're doing in Denmark, whatever you're doing in the UK is accepted in the rest of the 20-something members. And that's it, not the other way around. You have to do a tractor as Brussels dictates. You have to have a cucumber or a banana as Brussels dictates. And yeah, that was definitely a big part, and it's still a big problem. In any case.
And can I
yeah,
say
please
something?
Go ahead.
Because I think that's very important point. Because my fear is that EU, if we don't handle this problem with more and more regulation, then we'll have more exits in the future. And I think EU is a good idea. I mean, it's a great idea to have an internal market. It is a great idea to have EU to solve problems where EU is the right level to solve problems. For instance, climate. So it's a great EU is great for solving the climate problems because you have this it's called European the ETS. Because it's much more effective to have a regulation on EU level than it is on in the local and in the member states. But EU should focus on that. And if we focus too much on making all regulation the same bad regulation, then I fear that in the future we'll have more exits when people get more and more annoyed with regulation of cucumbers and so on. It's not there anymore, but it's just I think it's a great example because everybody knows it and it shows the points basically. But if more and more people get angry with this, then you'll increase the risk that more countries leave the union, and I think that's a bad thing. I would much rather prefer to fix the union than to leave it.
You have shown us, thanks to your report, that there's a significant increase in the European Union regulatory volume. Do you think this is related to the concept or the wish of the European Union becoming some sort of regulatory superpower that goes even beyond the borders of Europe, and this is something that the EU sees as a way to stay relevant in the global sphere?
I'm not sure I see EU as I think it's difficult to. I think it's just part of. I think all politicians want to grasp more power, basically, and all the institutions want to grasp more power. So for instance, what you see in Denmark is that, in my opinion, at least, the central government decides more and more, and the local municipalities, they decide less and less. So there's a centralization in Denmark, and there's a centralization in the EU. I'm not sure I don't know if it's driven by some wish to receive some goal in the future. I think it's just, I mean, no matter what the goals, what people have for future goals for the European Union, I think this is just the way that organizations behave, that they try to grasp power and take power from the local governments. And I think we've seen many examples where EU wants to see if they can impose some kind of tax or something, so they will get their own revenue instead of being reluctant and not relying on the member states. So I think this is I don't think there's a master plan like that. I think it's basically just the nature of institutions, and I also think, I mean, there's the member states, they can do something to avoid this centralization. There are measures they can take to sustain the principle of subsidiarity, but I just don't see them do that too much. And I think that's one of the discussions that we really need to have. I mean, there is a reason it's called a principle, and that's because principles, they should hold even when it's difficult. So, for instance, if you support the wording of a new regulation of, for example, the working environment, then you should, as a politician, say no to new EU regulation because it's not a subject for the EU. Working environment, in my opinion, is not a subject for the EU because the member states can easily fix that. I mean, the Danish parliament can easily fix and say how should it be here in Denmark, or the unions or the companies can say how should it be here in my company. It's a subject that is, in many aspects, are very suited for local authorities and even businesses and what people will call the market. So even if you as a politician agree that this is a good regulation, but it should be imposed by the member states, not by EU, and then you should say no out of principle. But unfortunately, there's many politicians that don't really see this as a principle, but just something that you take into account along with other things. But it should be handled more as a principle, where you say no even when it's very difficult.
Let's shift our attention from Brussels. Let's go to beautiful Copenhagen, to Denmark. One of the things you noticed on the report is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you pointed out that 60% of the total growth of Danish regulatory volume comes from EU regulations. How do you see this phenomenon? Do you think Danish sovereignty to a certain extent could be affected if this trend continues? What are your views about it?
Oh, that's a good question. So the first question here is, would we have this regulation even without the EU? Because some of the same problems would still be there, but then they will just be handled by the Danish parliament instead of the EU. And because of the subsidiarity principle, I think that would be a beneficial in in many cases. So I absolutely see this as a problem that we need to handle, because I think that in many cases, if we didn't have the EU regulation, it would either be more tailored for the local circumstances, or we wouldn't have it. There's also regulation that we would have that EU prevents, for instance, subsidizing businesses and so on. But the regulation we have, I think a lot of it would be better implemented at the local level. And I think if people, when I was doing this research, sometimes I was, so just to we use the computer code, but of course we do some quality assurance. So I was looking at some of these regulations, and I remember that I stumbled upon the regulation of either it was mopeds or motorbikes. I'm not 100% sure what it was, because it was about how the cap on the gas tank should look, what the curvature of what's called the screen around the wheels, what the curvature should be on that, and it was just very, very specific. And I mean, nobody does this to hurt. I don't think people impose regulation to hurt others. I think they do it to protect others, but they just very often they oversee the unintended consequences of this. So when I saw this very detailed regulation, I was just like, okay, we're never going to see innovation on motorbikes and mopeds, because it is fixed in regulation how they should look in the future. You can't. It's very difficult for a company to say, we invented this new cap on the gas tank that protects the driver, but it looks different than the current gas cap. So you can't. We can't get this to the market unless we change the regulation, and that's not possible. So we skip the idea. And you actually just had one case with the. Do you know the Swedish made bike helmet holding? Okay, so it's basically an airbag you have around the neck. So instead of having a helmet on your head, you have an airbag on your neck, and then there's some sensor that makes it pop out if you fall, and then it saves you. And in many cases, I read some research on this, and in many cases it's actually better than the bike helmet because it's thicker and softer, basically. But there are also circumstances where it doesn't protect. So if you drive directly into a wall, then it won't help you because there's not enough time for it to react. In that case, the helmet would be better. So the EU has regulation that says that personal protective equipment, it has to protect against all foreseeable situations. And one foreseeable situation is that you drive into a tree or a wall or something. So the EU regulation actually prohibits this bike airbag. And what this means is, now it has been prohibited. And what this means is that we'll probably never get this airbag now, because maybe there was a way to solve this problem. So you could have an airbag that will also work if you drive directly into a tree or a wall. But the most likely companies to invent that, to improve this product, was the companies that knew a lot about the product now, but now they're out of business because of the regulation. So now we'll never have this airbag. So that's a way that regulation, and that we can also, and it's not even sure that the bike helmet is better than the airbag. It just works in a different way. So overall, maybe the airbag was better because it protects better against some sorts of accidents. But now we have stopped this the innovation on this product, and we'll probably never get an airbag helmet for bikers because of this regulation. And that's one of the unintended consequences you see of regulation.
Enrique Dans, who is he's a Spanish scholar. He teaches issues related to innovation, by the way, in Spain. And he is somebody that we had him on this podcast in the past, but he's definitely no libertarian. He recently wrote the following questions in one of his articles related to regulation in Europe. He wrote the following: are we willing as citizens to accept that our regulator treats us like idiots who cannot enjoy a product or a service because we don't know how to protect our rights? And this has to do, with the prohibition of many things related to AI, self-driving cars. What's your reaction to this?
I think he has that's a very good question. I thought about it because there's a debate about Temu. In do you know this? I think it's Chinese or something. This application where you can buy a lot of cheap stuff, and there's a lot of the business associations in Denmark are they are not happy with that competition because they have to they have to live up to a lot of regulations, which Temu doesn't have to. And what I've seen is that they have been asking for regulation of Temu because they say that we need consumers want to be protected, but the choices of consumers just show that they don't want this protection because they go to Temu and buy. I myself bought some camping equipment here, some the sticks you use for the tent to put into the ground. I don't know what they call it in English. I bought some different stuff there. But so they argue that people want protection, but I'm not sure about that. People, they want protection. They don't want to buy unsafe stuff. But for first of all, it varies what you see as unsafe. So if you buy, for instance, I would never buy toys on Temu for my kids. I would buy them in a Danish store because I don't want to give them something that is could potentially be unhealthy. But I would not be that afraid to buy, call it toys, for myself, because I know how much I'm going to use it. I'm not going to chew on it and so on. So it varies. And I think he has a point, and I think most consumers are very capable of making these decisions, so they tailor them themselves in the best way. And people are different, so sometimes it makes sense to be very cautious and don't buy anything that could potentially be dangerous. For instance, if you buy it to your kids. Other times, you just want the cheapest stuff out there because you're going to use it for yourself. Maybe you're only going to use it once, and it doesn't matter if it has little chemicals or so, because it's a one-time use, and then it's not going to hurt you in the long term. So I have a high trust in people's ability to make decisions for themselves. I think it's difficult sometimes to make decisions for myself. I'm not 100% sure what to choose in all cases. And I think it's probably the same for others. But because that's the same for others, and I don't know them as good as the self do, then I would never try to tell anybody what they should choose, because how should I know what's the best choice for them? There's no way I can know that, because we're all different.
You've given us a lot of hints during this conversation, but based on your research, and I mean your wider research on the topic, what recommendations would you make for to policymakers at the European level, if you want the national level, to address the issues of regulatory volume perhaps going a little bit out of control?
Yeah, as I said, I think this is the nature of many political organizations, that they grasp onto power and impose regulations because that's easier than spending more money and so on. And you probably know the story about Odysseus. What is it's called? Is that the same name in English? The guy that tied himself to the mast of a ship so he wouldn't sail his ship onto the reef to listen to this beautiful song. So what he did was that he knew that he would act on short-term inputs, but he had a long-term goal that this short-term acting would destroy. So what he did was he tied himself to the mast to avoid hurting his long-term goal. And I think the politicians, and this can be applied at all levels, I think, for the governments, member states, and for EU. They should impose some. They should tie themselves to the mast. And I think the best answer to the best analogy to a mast is a regulatory budget. So you say that we have this amount of regulation now, and we shouldn't increase the amount of regulation in the future. Maybe we should even cut it down. So say that now today we have 20 million words in the EU regulation. We should get back down to 10 million as we had in 2010. It should be possible, and then what that basically would mean is that every time you impose new rules, you should repeal existing rules. And the reason I think this would work is that you will get the same trade-offs as from a financial budget. So if the EU wants to spend more money on something, then they have to cut the spending on other things because they have to balance the budget. And it's basically the same trade-off I want with regulation. Say that if you want to impose new regulation, then we should find existing regulation to repeal. And I think we have seen this work in Canada and also to some extent in the US. And I think that's one of the better ways you can handle this problem.
Thank you very much again for your time, Jonas. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm sure there will be opportunities in the future to keep on talking on these topics. Hopefully, maybe some deregulation efforts either in the EU or somewhere else. To everybody who listened to us, don't forget to subscribe in any platform that you use for podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube for the podcast and many other content that We Are Innovation produces both in English and in Spanish. And we'll meet again in the next episode of the We Are Innovation podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the We Are Innovation podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite platform. To know more about We Are Innovation, visit weareinnovation.global.